and that's how long I've known.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't know they went back that far.
Yeah. They were living in El Dorado Springs Canyon is what they said, and in one of the parking lots, they had their bus.
Because they play a lot of the sort of city summer series concerts.
Yeah, yeah. Do you know Jimmy Keith? Because he's always in the parade of the Frozen Dead guy days with his hearse. Yeah.
I don't make it up to many days.
Oh.
I went to one
Oh, okay.
in the beginning.
Yeah.
Decided celebrating the dead guy.
Yeah.
March was- I'm more of a summer music festival.
You like live guys better than me?
You know, those guys usually a little more entertaining. Hello.
So what are we, how long is this gonna be, Eugene?
I don't know, Valerie does most of the talking.
No.
That's not what she said before you got here.
I don't know, I got one, number 3, legal issues. I do some color commentary.
Depends on how many questions.
Yeah.
But it's usually
Hour-ish.
hour and a half match usually.
Yeah.
Yes, so it's
Are there agenda?
just we have them.
Oh, just you,
making
oh,
guess.
okay.
There's
It's
just a
seated
few,
only
so
for the. only
I
for-
only printed 3. One for you, one for me, and one extra just in case. Yeah. If you're a board member, you do just sign in there. If you're staff, welcome. We've never had staff before. I know. You're welcome. Love to have you come and join us. There's some chairs back here too. Sometimes there's questions about boards that we can't answer, so hey. Give it just a couple more minutes. We'll go by that clock instead of my watch. Are you, if you're a board member, go ahead and sign in the back there. So we're having a full house tonight.
Yeah, that's the turnout. We got training. We got training.
Over one of those crossings they have done over. There you go. Nice.
They did that in my turnout. It was like cheap.
Those were horrible over there.
Tea travel.
Oh my gosh.
Because they're all 52 rugged.
So at least the guy can stop. First 4 or 5 years, I don't know, you couldn't drive over.
Yeah. Yeah, they did the whole weekdays.
Oh, I thought it was even better. It went on for years.
Yeah, the J Road intersection improvement, that was.
I thought they should just close the whole thing. Finish the job. in 6 months.
It's in the one-way deal forever.
Exactly.
Okay, well, it's 6 o'clock. We're gonna go ahead and start. Mayor was gonna be here. I imagine he'll just come breezing in at the last moment, so we'll let him talk for a few minutes when he gets here. But before we do that, I'm Valerie Skid, I'm the city clerk.
Eugene May, city attorney.
And I think we'll just go around quickly, around the room, introduce yourselves, what board you're with. And if your staff, please introduce yourself as well. You start here.
I'm Peter Alexander. I'm on the Arts and Public Places Commission.
Is this your first go-round? or-
Yes.
Okay,
Mark Flower, Board of Adjustment.
welcome. You've been on before.
I have.
You're one of those that we just.
I Got term limited and
Now you're
now
back.
my year's up.
Yay, thank you.
Appreciate that.
Scott Converse Cable Trust, first time.
Tammy Dirksen, I'm with Public Works and Natural Resources, and I help with the Water Board and Board of Environmental Affairs.
Heather McIntyre, I'm from Public Works and Natural Resources as well, and I help with the Water Board and Board of Environmental Affairs.
I'm Jean Christopher. I'm with the Longmont Housing Authority Board.
Laurel Alterman, Art in Public Places.
Is this a first time for you?
Yes, this is
First time for
first
you?
time.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Rebecca Parrott, Transportation Advisory Board, first time.
Harrison Earl, Airport Advisory Board.
I'm sorry, Harrison?
Harrison.
Dave Burrows, Transportation Advisory Board, first time.
Jim Wardell, LPDA. This is not my first time.
I knew this wasn't the first rodeo.
Bob Glassner, Art in Public Places, this is my first time.
Okay.
Tyler Stavey, I'm the City Transportation Engineering Administrator and the liaison for the TAB.
I'm Janine Tarrant, first time Senior Advisory.
I'm Kate Collardson, Board of Environmental Affairs, and this is my first time.
And
Brian Bagley, your friendly neighborhood mayor. It's also my first time. Being mayor.
And I'm gonna let the mayor talk to you for just a minute, welcome you. And
Yeah, I just wanted to say, literally the only reason on my day off that I'm in this building right now is because I just wanted to come by and say, first of all, thank you for everybody being willing to step up and serve. Sometimes, well, actually most times people aren't willing to do so. And a lot of times, like this time, when you get so many people that want to serve, it's tough to decide who you really want to have you, it's tough sometimes to choose. But in this particular case, we had a lot of great people to select from. And if you're here serving the capacity that you're being asked to serve in, it means that that's actually something special this go around. So thank you. And just so you understand the importance of what you're about ready to do, most of you are serving on what's called an advisory board, which means that council, we don't have time to deal with everything. And believe it or not, when you're elected, you don't automatically get some magic brain transplant that makes you smarter, more knowledgeable, increases your experience, and shut up. Yeah, Jim's like, amen to that. But so what we do is we rely on each of your boards for counsel. Tuesday night, for example, we're going to be looking at whether or not we're going to bond to get a new swimming pool and ice rink. We're relying on the Parks and Recs Advisory Board to tell us, do we or do we not? And if we do or don't, what does that mean? What does it cost? Or others, or like the Cable Trust Board, we've got some real issues right now with budgeting, funding, being efficient with our resources and trying to make it anyway. So good luck with that, Or there's some other boards that require very technical experience that not only myself and city council, we lack, but staff lacks. So, we really look to your boards to run the city. And so I would encourage you all, please attend your board meetings, speak up, vote, participate, because literally that is how the city functions. And so literally without you, we could not do it. So thank you very much for your willingness to serve. And that you showed up to this meeting is a good start. Because sometimes they don't. So we appreciate it. Thank you. And with that, I'm going to go home and spend the evening with my children. So thank you all for your help.
I have a chair back here if you want to sign in first. And then So we have a couple new people that joined us in the back. If you just introduce yourself, tell us what board you're on, and if it's your first time serving on a board.
Ria Moriarty, and I'm on the museum board, and it is my first time, yes.
Okay.
Neil Lurie, I am on the Transportation Advisory Board, and also first time.
Okay. And you are?
I'm Kay Ballmeyer, and I'm on the Environment. Stop laughing, Jim. I'm on the Board of Environmental Affairs.
And your first time?
I think I've been on it for a while. I can't remember when I started. It might have been a whole year. So
Okay. But it's your first term.
Yeah, it's my first term.
Okay, great. I'm out of board packets, but we will get you one. I know that Maria, who is even you set up all the interviews and that kind of thing, just.
Everybody
this
turn your
evening-
phones off.
Okay, just this
I was
evening,
gonna say.
emailed it to everybody, so you'll have it electronically even if you don't have one tonight.
Okay, otherwise, I'm just gonna use this as an excuse for next year.
Okay, that's good. Sorry. That's okay. For those of you who came in a little bit late, I'm Valerie Skid, I'm the city clerk, and this is Eugene May, he's our city attorney. And we're gonna just share some information with you for the next hour or so. And we do want you to ask questions if you have them throughout the evening. If we don't have the answer for those questions, we'll certainly get back to you and follow up with an answer. Tonight, we have a couple of staff members here from some of the boards that if they have, if you have a question about a particular board and they happen to be here, we'll be happy to let them chime in and tell a little bit about their board. So you have a packet in front of you. One is some of the material we're going to cover tonight. We broke it, it used to be all one packet, we broke it out a little bit. There's also a little booklet called Colorado Independent Ethics Commission. Eugene will cover some of that information. This is actually put out by the state, so he's not going to read it to you, but he's going to tell you what's important in here. And this is our Engaging Citizens Community Involvement. We'll talk just very briefly about that. We won't really cover the information very thoroughly, but it's for you to take home, and as you're working on issues that you're inviting the public to participate in, there's some real good helpful things in there that you can look at later and perhaps think of some ideas, or use it as a guide for some ideas for your board. So the first thing we're going to just talk about are those general boards, just general board information, and that is basically covered in the book under Boards and Commission tab. The first part of your book simply is your council members and the boards they represent, in case you're not real familiar with all of them. Put a picture of them in so you can recognize them if you see them in the community. The actual guidance for boards is outlined in our city charter, and so that's what creates these advisory boards to the city council. It outlines some just general information, and then you will find that as you work with your boards, you will have some more specific information that pertains directly to your board. We're going to talk a little bit high level here, so it won't be specifically about your boards. If you have a question though, please ask, and we've either probably been asked before or we can get you an answer for it. We have about 21 or 22 different boards. It sometimes varies, but some of those include some pension boards. You won't see any of those members here because you have to be a city employee or have been a city employee to serve on those, and they're a little bit different kind of animal. There are several different types of boards. The mayor talked about the most common, and that's the advisory board. And most of our city boards and commissions are advisory to council. They don't necessarily make any final decisions, but they look at those areas in more detail than council has, specific areas in more detail than council has the time to be able to do. For instance, museum, looks at specific things that are in the museum. The recreation board looks at parks and recreation, looks at parks items, recreation items. So we have a bunch of different boards, and they advise council on things that are specific to their areas. The other types of boards that we have that are a little less common, there's a quasi-judicial boards, and we only have a few of those that Eugene will cover specifically with quasi-judicial, the special requirements around the quasi-judicial board. Planning and Zoning Commission serves sometimes in a quasi-judicial fashion and sometimes in an advisory fashion. So when he talks about quasi-judicial, you'll understand a little bit different when they're in different roles. We also have alternate boards. Many of you serve on a board that have alternate members, and those are considered our alternate board members. They are just as important to your board as a regular board member, because what happens is if you as a regular board member happen to be gone, then the alternate steps in. So they need to attend the meetings, just like a regular board meeting. They should, in a lot of cases, are allowed to participate on the board, ask questions, get all the information, and be just as knowledgeable as a regular board member. If you're gone, they have to step into your place and be able to make those decisions and know the information, so they need to stay up to date, even if they're not allowed to vote on an item at the end, because only the seated regular board members can vote on that. And then once an alternate is seated, when there's somebody gone, then they're allowed to vote on those items. So that's the difference between an alternate and a regular member. They're just as important to the board as the regular members and should be treated as if they are a regular member. Did you have a question, or was that just did I just catch a hand gesture out of the corner? Good, thanks.
I'll try to keep still.
Oh, no, it's okay. Then occasionally we have a task force, and those are boards that council creates for a specific purpose. Right now, we don't have any active task force, but we've had some in the past. We had an election task force, we've had an economic development task force. We had a task force years ago that was specific to looking at recreational vehicles and how those operate on our streets, park on our streets, that kind of thing. That was many years ago, so that might have been before your time, but I was here. Yeah, so, but the difference between a task force and the boards that you serve on is once the project they've been given to look at is done, board disbands. So they're just appointed for a specific period of time. Yes, now that was a.
Well, the Art Public Places Commission has task forces.
They may create their own task
Yes.
force to work on specific projects, but they aren't task force that the council appoints. So, but yes, you could also
They
use
are
task
created
force
to-
within your boards. Right,
And they make decisions, as I understand it, with
they make
Select-
decisions for.
selecting
AIPP.
artworks that are, I mean, I suppose it comes in the form of recommendation.
Well, I'm not that's one of the things that may be specific to arts and public places, that they get to make those decisions. They don't bring those back to council. And that's just part of the role that they've been provided from city council.
Well, the task force, as I understand it, look at submissions for specific art projects.
Right.
And then they select which one they recommend, or essentially that's the decision, as I understand.
Yeah. AIPP actually makes those decisions as a board on which pieces to select, right? And many of the boards also have a council liaison person on your board. Not all of them, but many of them do. The council liaison is there to not to make decisions for you or to influence your decision necessarily, but to provide you with information if you have it on what council specifically is looking at or looking for. They can give you some input, but they are not there to make a decision. They shouldn't be voting on your decisions. They shouldn't be influencing your decisions in terms of giving you the direction they want you to go. So they're there to help you, not to tell you what to do.
Did we get to pick the boards they want to be on?
They do that every 2 years when new council members are elected. They spend an evening as their organizational meeting deciding which boards they want to sit on, and they will change every 2 years. So once they've been appointed, if you've got one now, they probably won't change again until 2019, because that's when new council members will come on. Okay. There is a list of all of our boards and their staff. I believe their staff liaisons are on this. Staff liaison, the location of their meetings, the time of their meetings. And right before that list, I asked Maria to put in an article that was in our Colorado Municipal League that is on quasi-judicial boards. I think you've got it. It's kind of in layman's terms what a quasi-judicial board is. Eugene will talk more specifically about that, but it also helps with understanding on some of what those quasi-judicial items are. And we're not turning it over to him just quite yet, so hold on to that thought.
Well, one thing I would add on the boards, a lot of boards have enabling ordinances in Title II. I think most boards do. It lays out your duties, your sort of jurisdiction, what subject matter you can discuss, and what your some of the procedures are in there too. So I would encourage you to read those for your meeting. I think it really sets the stage for what the purpose of that board is, what the relationship is to council, what kind of issues you would be dealing with.
You may have separate rules of procedure that your board has adopted, or bylaws. Sometimes they're referred to as bylaws. You may have a set of bylaws. Most of you have probably all been to at least one meeting, correct? Already? Okay. As prior to that meeting or as part of that first meeting, hopefully the staff member that is the liaison, if you had bylaws or rules of procedure, they provided you with copies of those. Often boards have their own separate orientation just about their board. So if you haven't been to one or haven't had one, staff will sometimes do a one-on-one if you request it so that you can get up to date and figure out what kind of supporting materials might be helpful for you to become familiar with. So you can ask your staff liaison if there wasn't a specific orientation. There may not be. They may just provide you with information as items come before you. So we're going to talk just a little bit about how to be an effective board member. It's a lot of it's common sense information, and it's this next section, some of it's repeated, so I'm just going to highlight pieces of it, and if you have a few minutes, you can take a look at, I picked some of these articles from different publications that we get as a clerk that kind of talk about effective meetings and golden rules of being a good member. But basically it's one, know your information. Spend time when you get an agenda packet. You should get an agenda packet from your staff liaison a few days before, hopefully a week before the meeting, that will have background material in it about the items that are coming before you. Make sure you thoroughly read that. You jot down any questions that you have so you don't forget when you get to the meeting, and you can ask those. And don't ever feel or hesitate to ask a question at a meeting. Even as a new board member, sometimes you're a little bit shy and just don't want to look like you don't want to step out of line or something, but no question is a dumb question. And probably if you've been reading the materials and you've got a question, someone else probably had that same question and just hasn't asked it, or they asked somebody offline, and so now they know what the answer is. So don't hesitate to ask questions if there's something that's not clear within the materials, or that you need more information on in order to be able to process all of the information and make a decision. You do need to understand your role on the board, what your role is as compared to the role of the staff liaison. The staff liaison is there as the subject matter expert in most cases. If not, they at least know what best practices are, because this is their field of expertise and they stay up to date on best practices in the industry. It doesn't mean they have the answer to everything, but they can present you with the information that they have, research that they've done, and it may not align exactly with your views and philosophies or what you bring to the table, but use an open mind. Look at all of the information and understand that staff is coming from an area of expertise, and they're providing you with as much information as they can so that you can make informed decisions. And don't hesitate to ask them questions. That's what they're there for. You can ask them offline even, but in most cases, any information that you have should be shared with the board so that everybody is coming from the same place when they make decisions. Yes?
Is there any open records policy on communication with your staff liaison at a board?
Yes, if you can hold on to that thought, we will certainly.
That's my section.
That's his section, and he's real good at that. So, let's see if I missed anything there. Okay, when you're participating on the board, this is probably just something that you all are aware of, but communicate as clearly and effectively and concisely as you possibly can. There are a lot of people on the boards. There's lots of opinions that come with those people and perspectives. And so it's, rather than try to persuade people, just lay your thoughts out there, let everybody hear them, and then sit quietly while other people lay their thoughts out there as well. It's not a time to criticize, which I would hope that nobody is trying to do that, or to judge, or to try to persuade from that your idea is better than somebody else's. Remember that people have different perspectives. Even on the same topic, they can come from two totally different places. And it doesn't make one right or wrong. It's just simply the filters that you've developed as you've matured over time that you come to that board with. And they have their own set of filters and their own information that they've gathered over their lifetime as well. And that's what they bring. And that's what makes our board so wonderful, is that not everybody is the same. Not everybody thinks the same, and not everybody has the same opinions. And so be as objective as you can be open-minded and willing to listen to other points of view, and consider that information when you make your decision. Even if it doesn't persuade you to change your mind, at least consider it, because it is as valid as the perspective that you bring to the table as well. Let's see, what else? Be there on time. Sometimes we get into a little bit of a culture of lateness and show up 5 minutes late or whatever, but be respectful of other people's time. Those who show up on time, the meeting should start on time. And you can't always be there exactly when it starts, but understand that that's really important to running an effective board, and your chair and your staff liaison are prepared and not wasting each other's time by being there and being ready to go. And show up. That's really critical. If you cannot be there, because we all have life to deal with as well, please let your staff liaison know ahead of time, because they need to make sure that they're going to have a quorum, or they can call one of the alternates to make sure they're actually going to be there if they have alternates, and can put them in your place. And if they have that information ahead of time, they're prepared when the meeting starts, rather than scrambling at the last minute to figure out when they can take care of items or who's going to sit on the board in your place. So just communicate. That's a very important thing to remember. Establish a good working relationship with your other commission members. Get to know them. Come a little bit early and just have a conversation with them and understand, something about them and where they're coming from, and get to know them as individuals. And I think that really helps not only enrich the decisions that the board makes, but it helps us enrich our own lives by meeting new people and sharing information. You do need to become familiar with your rules of procedure. There may be some background studies that have been done. Like I know with Parks and Recreation Advisory Board, they have a Parks Master Plan. Staff should provide you with a copy of that early on as you become a member. I believe Water Board has some guiding principles and documents. So the more you can read up ahead of time on some of those things and become more knowledgeable on those items that govern your board or influence the decisions that you make, the better prepared you will be when the issues come before you. Let's see. What else do I miss? I know one important part is the public. Don't ever forget the public. Many of the items that are gonna come before you, you will want some public input on, or council will expect you to take some public input on. A lot of times your boards meet on a regular basis, and you'll never see anybody from the public at your meetings. But if you're working on a big project, remember that there are other perspectives outside of the room as well, and staff will help guide you through some of that. But if there's ever a point that there's a project going on and you feel like there should be some public input, that would be one of the things I would raise with the board and say, should we consider having some public piece of this where we get perspectives from outside of this room. One of the things that's in here that I just briefly showed you was our engaging citizens. Longmont spend a lot of energy and time and training on internal facilitators to be able to pull groups of people together and do public input processes, public partnering in a lot of different ways. And this book is just chock full of different, and some of them are very fun ways to get public input. What we're most familiar with are the kind of public hearings that you will have at real formal meetings, kind of like Planning and Zoning Commission or the City Council, where everybody gets, council, they get 3 minutes, they get up, they say their little piece, they sit down, and that's public input. It's not always the most effective way to get perspectives from out in the community. So take a look at some of these. There's some wonderful things. There's charrettes, there's some what, I can't even think of the names of them. They're design things. You can also use the website in a number of different ways. We have now social media things that staff has at their available to them that they can help also do some of the online surveys. That's less personable, but we also have equipment that we can do in person where people can come in and just do voting on topics that you want them to do or that you want some input on. That is real effective as well. So there's open houses and all kinds of things like that that are outlined in this book. And I would encourage you, if you have some big projects that you're looking at, to look at some of these different ways to get that public input rather than just saying, come to this meeting at this time and give us your 1 or 2 minute interpretation of this thing. You can get some, but you're going to get the people that tend to come out for those. And sometimes you have to reach out and go to where other people are in order to get that input. Okay. And did anybody have any questions on just some of that basic operating stuff?
Are all of these open to the public?
All of these meetings, yes, and Mr. Legal will
So,
cover that in just a
Mr.
minute. And I'm almost done, so then we'll turn it over to him in just a second. We are going to talk a little bit about basic parliamentary procedure. Most of your boards are pretty informal. You're just going to discuss things. You're going to have a one-on-one or bunch on one. I don't know how what you want to call it, but it's going to be a conversational type of a meeting. Staff is going to give you some information. They may make a little short formal presentation, questions and answers, have some discussion among board members, and that's it. So it's real informal. You don't have to follow a real standard parliamentary procedure. But you may have to make some decisions. You may have some public there. And parliamentary procedure, if you ever go, it's kind of like traffic signals in a community. If you ever go to a community somewhere in the country that you are not familiar with, and you drive into that town and you see a stoplight, if it's green, you know you can go. If it's yellow, you know you need to use caution, slow down, and maybe be prepared to stop. And if it's red, you know you need to stop. Well, that's kind of what parliamentary procedure is to a business meeting. It's a standard set of operating guidelines that when someone comes into that meeting, they know what to expect. And that's what parliamentary procedure is. I'm going to cover really basic parliamentary procedure because that's probably all that you're ever going to need to know. So in parliamentary procedure, you should address all of your comments to the chair. One thing that this does is it keeps people from engaging on one-on-one, especially if there's a conflict situation or a controversial type topic. So you address, I'm looking at you as if you're the chair. You address your comments to the chair, and the chair is also the person that guides the traffic or directs the traffic. You ask the chair for the floor, the chair recognizes you, and then you're able to speak. In some cases, you raise your hand in your meeting. You'll find out what those standard operating procedures are in your meeting, but it's always the chair that gets to say who's going to go next. And so address your comments to the chair. Members who are there for the public speaking should address their comments to the chair. It keeps them from getting in a one-on-one with anybody in particular, and the chair should always ask them, especially if they're there to create a disturbance, which happens rarely, very rarely. But if they are, then the chair should take control and say, please address your comments to me. And he's the traffic cop, basically. So that's one of the common customs. No member of the group should actually speak until every member of the group has had an opportunity, should speak a second time until every member of the group has had an opportunity to speak at least once. So a good chair will monitor that, but self-monitor it as well. If you've talked once and nobody else has talked, just ask the chair. You say, I've got some additional comments. If there's nobody else that wants to make a comment, he'll hopefully offer that, or she will offer that to other members of the board, and then say, no, go ahead. Nobody wants to say anything. But at least you've taken it upon yourself, and your role as a board member, to allow other people to have an opportunity. It keeps one person from jeopardizing the entire not jeopardizing. It's not jeopardizing. What? Monopolizing. That's the word I'm looking for. The entire discussion and conversation. Let's see. And then if you are taking a formal vote on something, there's a proper procedure to bring that forward. Somebody needs to make a motion, another board member needs to second it, and then is when the discussion should happen. Sometimes the discussion happens first and then the motion comes. So you'll see how that happens in a board, but in a real formal procedure, the motion should be made first and then that's what is discussed on the board. And you'll see our mayor do that now on occasion, is try to get the motion on the table so that everybody directs their comments toward that motion rather than go 100 different directions and then not know where anybody's at. So somebody makes a motion, the board member makes a motion, somebody seconds it, the chair opens it up for discussion, and then they take a vote. Now, that's called a main motion, the one that's on the floor. There could be somebody that wants to change that main motion a little bit. One of the things that people commonly say is, well, I make a friendly amendment. In reality, there is no such thing as a friendly amendment. If you want to amend a motion, you need to make another motion and say, I amend the motion to, and then tell them what you want to be amended, and someone needs to second that. Otherwise, the motion is not amended. When people say, I want to make a friendly amendment, and it's real slight, and the person who made the original motion says, oh yeah, that's what I meant, or that's fine with me, you can they let that slide. Our council lets that slide sometimes. Our legal department lets them let that slide sometimes. But if it's, and it really is, because it's small, everybody seems to agree with it, and so they let that slide. But technically, there is no such thing as a friendly amendment. It should be made in that more formal standard. If that happens and you have the main motion and you have another motion to amend it, you have to vote first on the amendment. Everybody has to agree to amend it, and then you take a vote on the motion as amended. So you have actually a 3-step process, or 4-step, I don't know. Motion, amendment, vote on the amendment, and then vote on the motion. And that's the technical way to get through in parliamentary procedure. And that is as far as I'm going. There are hundreds of different things about parliamentary procedure, but that's probably all you're ever going to need within your boards in terms of actual formal parliamentary procedure. Unless there's something else that you think they will also run into.
No, I mean, people make hobbies of parliamentary procedure, and Robert's Rules of Order is that big, but motion and amendment, you can get 90% of what you need to get done. And then my perspective when I'm advising council, I'm always thinking, is it going to change the outcome? The friendly amendment, everybody knows what they're talking about. Is it going to mess up what they're trying to do? Or if we get challenged, is it going to be a problem? And in most cases, especially on advisory boards, however you get to that decision, that's what's going to work best for your board. Don't get caught up in the formalities of parliamentary procedure, especially if you develop a rapport with your board and people are going by the common traffic rules. If everybody understands it's an informal board, I just say go with that. Go informal on the Robert's Rules.
These become important when especially when it's pretty complex and there's different opinions. And then that's when you really need to make sure everybody is clear on what it is they're voting on. And that's when, if it starts getting muggy, then you should ask for, before anybody takes a vote, what are we voting on? and then they can clarify what the motion is that's on the table, whether it was put there formally or whether it wasn't put there formally. You need to be clear before you say yes or no what it is that you're voting on. Yes.
I found one thing about that, well, I guess at least on my board, is presenting motions in the positive form avoids confusion down the line.
Right.
It's that double negative thing.
Yeah, if it's presented the negative and it loses, does that mean it passed? Or do you have to have another,
Give an example.
Somebody is proposing something and somebody doesn't like it, say, I vote that we disapprove of this, and the board votes. And
So they voted yes, but they actually.
To say no.
yeah,
To say no.
but and the motion loses. Well, the motion was negative. If it loses, does that mean it passed? No, it doesn't.
No, it doesn't.
But
mean
it
that.
creates confusion. So if you put it in the positive, it's an up or down vote. So
That shows up sometimes with issues that are voted on, I mean, statewide.
Mhm. Yeah.
Hopefully things are deliberately or not stated ambiguously to confuse you as to whether you're voting for something or against something. I would assume that would not happen on the boards at some moment.
It could, in a situation like
has.
that.
Yeah.
Because if that
Deliberately
is,
states it ambiguously to.
Not deliberately, just sloppy.
well, and the example he gave was a very good one. If they say, if they make a motion to disapprove it and you vote yes, that means
You're
you're not approving it,
you're
but it
voting against
doesn't
it.
mean you have approved it. So you've got to make another motion to approve it. So you might as well have made the motion to approve it in the first place, and then people vote yes or no. You know, and that's far clearer. It gets done with the same thing, and it's not confusing for folks. So, yeah, that's an excellent example of it. I'm done.
You're done. Well, you're done for now.
Done for now.
So I've got some legal issues to cover. But before I go into that, I like to impress upon people that you are, when you're acting as a board member, you are an official of the city of Longmont. You are representing the city. You're an ambassador of the city to the community. And we work very hard at the city to stay true to our values of transparency and public involvement. And we would expect all of our board members to abide by the same values. And I think a lot of those values are embodied in the open meetings law, which is the first topic I will cover. And the intent of the open meetings law, or the legislative intent, is that the formation of public policy is public business and may not be conducted in secret. And it's not all discussions about going on in the city. It has to be related to the policy-making powers of a governmental entity. So when you guys are considering an issue that you're going to make a recommendation to city council, that's part of the policy-making process. As we heard from the mayor, council members are looking at the entire organization. They've split specialty areas into boards and commissions and are expecting you to become the subject matter experts. And so when you're discussing issues that you're going to make a recommendation to council, that is part of the policy-making process. Starts at a board and commission, gets to council, becomes policy if and when they adopt it. You know, I think email is a great improvement about our communication, but it's also the bane of lawyers and open meeting purposes. Email conversations, chain emails can be considered a meeting, because if one board member is talking about, hey, I like this part, or I think we should recommend this type of policy to council, that's discussing the public business of the city, but it's being done in secret. The public has no opportunity to be part of that email chain. And so there is no case law currently on email in Colorado. There's case law in other states that say it clearly is. It's addressed in the open meetings law. And this is one of the most common areas I see boards and commissions getting close to the line on open meetings law compliance. So be aware that the reply all, don't hit the reply all. I tell my council members, reply to me. You know, if you're just trying to set up a time to meet, that's okay to say, oh, I'm busy then. But if it's, hey, I think, you know, we should do this with the ice rink, that's not okay. That's getting into the policy making process.
So if you hit reply all in that case, that would then becomes subject to the open meeting law. That email should be then available
Right.
for a FOIA request or to the public in some form.
Formation of public policy is public business, and the public's not involved in that email.
Well, the question I have is that there must be a line somewhere between a full meeting of your commission and two of you run into each other at a coffee shop and you sit down and you discuss an upcoming issue.
Correct. So
Where is that line?
there is a line in the statute, and that's an excellent segue. So the open meetings law requires when 3 or more members of board or commission get together, that is open to the public.
So if 3 of you meet at a coffee shop, then it's subject to open meetings law.
Correct.
Does it have to be announced?
4 needs to be announced, and this is with a 7-member council or 7-member board.
We have some 5-member boards, so it'd be,
So it's a majority.
So if you run into
Right.
2 other people, we can't talk.
Correct.
you can talk about your kids.
You can talk about your
your
kids.
family.
So, but the open meeting law sort of contemplates that. It says that chance meetings and social gatherings are not open meetings unless you talk about public policy making business of the city. So, if you get there at the holiday party, it seems like you guys know each other in a lot of instances, that's not an open meeting. But if you start talking about, hey, should we have a 2-sheet ice rink, recommend that to council, then that could be a problem. I think just be aware, 2 by 2, if we're looking to inform the council about an issue, we will meet with them 2 by 2 because of the open meetings law.
Are we expected to keep all the emails that we get pertaining to the commission?
So that actually goes into the next topic, which is open records.
Okay.
So open records are anything made, maintained, or kept by the organization, the city, in the course of its business. So, this has the tie to the policymaking powers of the body. If it's related to your official duties as a board member, that is a public record. And there are certain exceptions to disclosure if it's confidential legal advice, if a company is submitting a development application and has proprietary business information, they can claim that. But generally, you should assume that anything that you write, if you email, is going to be a public record subject to disclosure. And, I tell people apply one test. It's called the front page times call test. Imagine that email is going to end up on the front page of the Times call. Do you want to send that email? Do you even want to write that email? In all seriousness, that's what I tell the council members, because before you hit send, just take a minute and think. Email has just changed the whole way that we communicate, the expectations of sort of an immediate response. But it goes back to where I started, in that you are an ambassador of the city. You are representing the city. And so in your communications, you should be respectful and be willing to stand by anything you say. And, we've seen, especially on controversial topics, it can get a little heated. People are passionate, and that's why we love our boards and commissions. But when that becomes public, just think about the consequences of that being.
So if I send an email to a friend in another state and I say, some of the members of this commission I'm on are just really impossible to deal with, that's fine. But if I send it to 2 other members of the commission saying, what are we going to do about so-and-so who's always interrupting the meeting, then that becomes subject to public records law?
It doesn't matter how many people you send it to.
Oh, okay.
It just matters whether it's made, maintained, or kept in the course of official business. Right. So even your first one is borderline. If you were expressing that view as a board member, then it was in your official capacity, and then it could be
right.
subject to
You could run into somebody that says, how's it going on this very important commission that you're on? And I say, well, it's fascinating, but there's a couple of members that are kind of slow things down. I can say that in conversation to people who are not part of the commission, correct?
Oh, yeah.
And if I do that by email, does that change it?
It comes down to analysis.
My friend in Texas sends me a note and says,
that's probably personal. There's case law that personal is personal.
Right.
Do we get Longmont email addresses? .gov email addresses?
No.
Good. I know this because I'm the Longmont Observer and we get to go read those, all of them, so.
So, and what I think probably our standard operating procedure of our boards is that if there's any kind of information or email that needs to go out to the entire board, it goes to the staff liaison. And they're the ones that send that out. And then comments are directed back to the staff liaison. And rather than create this opportunity for you to have a conversation with each other.
You mean to
So-
get into trouble, isn't it?
We're helping you.
We're trying to
conduct
keep
your
you out of trouble.
And we do protect, I mean, you all know, we get a lot of spam. So we also do not disclose that in those emails because it's for the purpose of communicating for official business. And
So you have to keep all the emails from the Nigerian friends.
right, no, I've got plenty of those. So
And you don't have to keep the emails from your staff liaison that sends you the agendas and things like that. You don't need to keep that because that was created here in the city. It was a record that we have to keep. The email itself is considered transitory, it can go away pretty quickly, but the attachments are have some retention periods associated with them that we have to keep by law as part of the open records and make available to the public.
So if we have some questions, we need more information from the liaison or maybe one of the staff members. Do we need to copy the rest of the members so that they all get that?
I'm telling you, don't copy the rest of the members. Ask the staff liaison and the liaison can share that information with everybody. But if you copy all the rest of the members, you've just created a conversation. But it is okay to ask a question of your
I have
staff.
a question. If you attend a meeting and are to report to your board about what went on in that meeting or the subject, is it better to do that report to the liaison and have them bring it up to the board members and not necessarily to write a report, but to do that directly with the liaison?
So I was actually about to comment that there's gray area. So requesting information is fine, but information engenders thoughts and responses. So, if you were to write a report and send it out to your board, that by itself is probably okay from an open meetings perspective. But then, a board member steps in and says, oh, that's not what I said. Or, we decided this, or, then you start to talk about the policymaking process, and then the requirements of the open meeting law kicks in, and all of a sudden you're having a meeting online.
And to be safe, do it all for the staff liaison. Even our council, when they have something that they picked up at a conference or something like that, and they want the rest of the council to have it, and they've got it, they're sending it via email, they send it to me. And then I send it out to the whole council, even back to them, because they go back as a group. But that way, everybody's got it. It came through a channel that if somebody wants to see it, it's public record, easily obtained and given to the public. Because one of the things that happens is if you're using your own personal email, and we get an open records request and says, I want to see any and all correspondence from board members on the airport advisory board about some such. I have to go to the staff liaison, who will then have to go to you as the individual board member, because I don't have access to your email. I don't know what you sent or haven't sent. And your personal email could become subject to the open records. So, and that is really hard to get to from a staff perspective. But if everything is channeled through the staff liaison, we can do that. I mean, that would still be difficult even when you're channeling, because we have to have you go through your own personal email and say, this is all I did, was send you this. You have to verify that with you.
But theoretically, if you're reporting on a planning board meeting that occurred, it's still subject to your interpretation personally of what that board is saying. about any particular thing. So is it better just to do a verbal report?
It might be, I
When
mean,
you're in a committee meeting?
I think for getting information to the rest of your board members, best practice would be to give it to your staff liaison and include it in the agenda packet for your upcoming meeting.
Okay.
I mean, that's kind of what we try to marshal at city council.
So you could write that report and send it to
But if you write to the staff liaison, see, I think this is something that everybody on the commission needs to know. And then the staff liaison distributes that, that automatically is part of the record through the staff liaison's email, correct? So that it being on my computer is not, is critical.
Well, on the record as different meetings, it's not part of the agenda packet.
Well, but I assume what you're saying is the staff liaison, all of their email is covered by public records law and therefore will be preserved, correct?
Yes.
So if I send it
It would be a public
to her, then it becomes automatically a preserved record.
Yeah.
By the city, not,
according to our retention schedule.
yeah, not necessarily by me, but by the city, it will be retained, right?
I don't know if the city staff members have anything to add about transmission of information. Sounds A-okay.
Everything comes through staff, so we don't have board members talking to each other. And then if we have staff members that want to get something out, or even a guest that's coming to the meeting that's on the agenda, it all comes through us and then we push it out.
Okay, sort of getting back on open meetings, we covered the main interesting parts. Your staff will take minutes of your meetings, that's part of the open meetings law. There's also a section of the open meetings law that recognizes that sometimes a public body needs to close the doors, and they're called executive sessions. There are 7 topics for legitimate executive sessions. My favorite is legal advice from an attorney. It's confidential client communications. There's also acquisition of real property interest. You know, if you're looking to buy a piece of open space, you want to tell the seller how much you're willing to pay. We also use specialized security arrangements, just if we're talking about sort of emergency procedures on city council meetings, just in case. That can be done in private. If you have any need for an executive session, you should contact the city attorney's office. There are procedures to properly call and document executive sessions. I think in my 9.5 years here, we've had 1 executive session at the Historic Preservation Board with a real property interest question. So they're not very common, but just know that they're out there. Open records, I've kind of addressed. My takeaway message is front page times call test. Just think about before you hit send. Conflict of interest, you know, there are a lot of state statutes about conflict of interest. It's all very difficult to apply. I mean, unless you got the bag of money in the freezer, you're really very unlikely to commit a conflict of interest by statute. You know, I like to boil it down. A lot of it is it's about your own judgment. And I like to apply the test. What would your mom think? You know, if you think your mom might not like it, well, maybe you shouldn't be doing it. Isn't that what we were raised doing? But there are a couple of more specific areas of conflict of interest. There is the Colorado Independent Ethics Commission. This is based on a constitutional amendment where the voters thought it was wise to set some minimum guidelines for ethics. The most important one in here that I get concerned with is really on page 14, if you're interested. It's a gift ban. You may not receive anything of value in excess. At the time it was passed, it was $50. The last one I saw, it's consumer price index adjusted, so it's up to $59 or $62. I hate to disappoint you, but you're probably not going to be getting big bribes with the positions that you're doing. But the prohibitions of this constitutional amendment also apply to basically your immediate family. So just be aware if you're getting, hopefully we'll be getting tickets to the Broncos. So face value, probably more than $50. It would have to relate to your official business, since most of you are on advisory boards. It really doesn't come into play, but it's out there, and some people have stubbed their toes on this. There are a number of exceptions. If you get the paperweight for your years of service kind of thing, that's fine. And there's a lot of little different nuances. The Independent Ethics Commission would put out this booklet. You can write them if you have ethical questions about this constitutional provision, and they will issue opinions. And so there's actually quite a few, maybe 70 opinions out there. A lot of them are about conference travel, per diems, food, although there is a case about the Broncos gave a basket to the clerk and they had a nice side entrance. It really didn't work out too well under this. And to go back to an issue that we talked about earlier for quasi-judicial boards, and I think I only heard one, which is Board of Adjustment. I think Longmont has 3. There's the Master Board of Appeals, there's the Planning Commission that deal regularly with quasi-judicial matters. As the name implies, you're sort of an administrative judge. You are applying an already established set of laws, of criteria to somebody's property, to somebody's plan to develop. You're affecting somebody's rights. And in that circumstance, that person is entitled to due process, where the decision is to be made based on evidence presented at a hearing. And to preserve that, the most common issue is ex parte communication. That means communicating with the board member, the quasi-judge, outside the hearing context, because that's not fair. The applicant doesn't get to hear it. The staff doesn't know what's going on, and that commissioner has information that the other commissioners don't, and that is not a fair hearing process. In that circumstance, you can disclose on the record if it was sort of accidental. You should disclose anyways, and decide whether or not you can be a fair and impartial decision maker. That's the conflict. That's the standard you're trying to maintain. And if you can't, you need to recuse yourself. You disclose, you say, this is a conflict, and you need to leave the meeting.
So you're saying quasi and you're saying sort of. Does that mean these boards have legal authority? Because I have seen the planning board make a decision and then have that appealed to the city council and have it reversed. So who actually has?
So it depends upon what type of application it is. For planning and zoning, there are different levels, like say for annexation agreements, they make a recommendation to council. So they are in an advisory capacity. On minor development applications, they are the decision maker and their decision can be appealed. And there's a whole number of varieties there. So it depends, I guess, is the answer.
That's why you say sort of. So an advisory board, which is what most of these are, has no legal authority. They just advise the city council on what they should do.
They aren't a decision maker. They aren't affecting people's rights. The flip side of quasi-judicial is legislative. When council is making a policy decision, none of these due process rights apply. That's when you see, more on the state and federal level, that's when people lobby their legislator to advance their interests. And then that's perfectly fine for legislative matters because it's not about affecting somebody's rights, it's about creating new policy. So that's the distinction. There are other situations for conflicts of interest, and that's where I kind of apply the would your mom approve kind of standard. If you have a personal interest in a matter coming up like, I talk about ice rinks and pools because it's on the agenda tomorrow. But if, your spouse runs a pool company and could be potentially bidding on, the next pool complex in Longmont, maybe you got a conflict, a financial conflict or a personal conflict. But those are reasonably rare. Certainly in the quasi-judicial setting, Board of Adjustments, if your property is adjacent to and they want to adjust the setback to have a bigger carport and it directly affects your view, then you probably have a conflict. You need to disclose, you need to recuse yourself.
So in the case of art in public places, that commission, the one thing that they do decide is the art on the move pieces are changed every year. And things are submitted, and then the commission meets, looks at all of them, discusses them, I'm told very vigorously, and then selects with strong opinions, various ways, I'm sure. And then everybody says it's fun, no. But then selects one. But if you know one of the artists, then you should probably recuse yourself from that vote.
It depends on how you know them. You
Yeah.
just know of them, or
No, you know them
that
personally.
you're a personal friend, or you're.
So on that, I would say, one of the beauties of picking board and commission members from the community is that each person comes with their own experiences. And that's really the value they add to the board and commission.
Just having seen their artwork before is
But
not
on the flip
disqualifying.
side,
But if you're close friends with one.
right. And so can you remain an impartial decision maker? So yes, you bring your own experiences, your own relationships, and that's a good thing for boards and commissions. But can you remain impartial? I mean, that's what I would, when I advise somebody on a conflict matter, it's really about you. And I can tell you the criteria to apply, but I can't tell you if you're conflicted out. Only you know whether you, what type of relationship that is and whether you can remain an impartial decision maker. So it's up to you. And then,
We had an example of a council member that was a member of St. John's Church, and there was something in front of them about St. John's. They disclosed that they were a member, disclosed that they felt they could be objective, and did vote on that. And that's perfectly fine. That's what he means by you have to make that decision in terms of.
and that was perfectly fine. They were just a member of the church. They weren't in management, they weren't in facilities. They were just a plain old member. And that is one of the things you look at is, what's your position within the hierarchy of the organization. If you're at the top, it's not looking too good. If you're down and just, we have council members that are members of organizations, environmental groups, civic groups, whatever. Just being a plain member is not a reason to be conflicted out absent some other extenuating circumstance. So that's really all I got on open meetings, open records, and conflicts. I'm happy to continue discussions or take questions if anyone's got any.
If not, which is why he said I'm not done, because he raised a couple things that reminded me there's two other things I wanted to just discuss briefly with you. One of those is you're communicating with council and how boards do that. Like I said, many of the boards have a council liaison, and that is one way that you can communicate with council members, is that liaison brings that information back to the council. The city council has just recently started what they call work sessions on the Friday morning before a regular meeting of theirs. They have work sessions, and that was primarily started so that they could share some of that information, because they're finding that during a council meeting, they don't get an opportunity to really say what's going on the boards, and to find out from other board council members what's happening. So that's one of the primary reasons they have these work sessions, is to share what's happening in the various boards. So that's becoming a good way to communicate with the council, is have your liaison brings information back. If you don't have a liaison, the staff liaison often brings information to council, provides them reports about what's going on. That's another way to communicate with council. Occasionally, the council will have a joint meeting with the board. It doesn't happen often, but we've had them. Planning and zoning has met with them, especially when there's topics that's really good for everybody to get the same information at one time or update on a big project at one time. We've met with the Longmont Housing Authority. They have met with the library. We've met with the library board. So you can, as a board, request a joint meeting with council. It's really difficult sometimes to schedule those, but if it's important, they don't make the decision of whether it's important. But if it's really a topic that you really want to share with council and really need to, as a board, share that, we can set up a joint meeting and just your staff liaison and the director of that department generally brings that forward and asks council if they can put that on the agenda and have a joint meeting. And the staff member will put it on the council meeting for that particular purpose. Communicating with council, you're at any time welcome to call a council member as another board member and have a conversation with them if there's something that you want to discuss specifically about something that's in front of the board. I don't know if there's anything else to, did you write in something about that?
Not about that.
Okay.
I thought about a different topic.
Okay, well then let me finish my other second topic. I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget it. Eugene talked about minutes and the staff will take minutes of your boards. I just want to talk a little bit about expectations of what you'll see in those minutes. Don't expect to see the whole conversation in those minutes. With council, we don't do strict action minutes, which what you'll see in a set of strict action minutes is who was there and the topic and not what was said, but the action that was taken. So you'll see the motion and you'll see just the action. We do a little bit more than that, but not much more than that. We do not capture the entire conversation with council in our minutes. We might highlight a couple of really important things that they discussed or really that they all hit on really hard. We might highlight some of those, but we do not capture the conversation. Now, some of the boards have much more involved set of minutes or a bigger set of minutes, and there is some of the discussion captured, but it will not be so-and-so said this, and so-and-so said this, and so-and-so said this, and so-and-so. It will be a conversation, and they might pick out pieces that different board members have said when there's a kind of a recurring theme, but don't expect to see every comment that you make appear in those minutes. It's just impossible to do, and it's really impossible to read all that. You might as well sit through the whole meeting. It's really about what was done in the meeting, what the final outcomes are that is important for the board secretary to capture and convey in that set of minutes. And so.
Are city council meetings recorded?
They absolutely are. That gentleman right there records them live, streams them live on Longmont Observer, and
is that recording then kept as a?
Well, the official record of the city council is the adopted minutes. That is the official, and that is the one that's kept permanently. We do keep those recordings of the videos and things for a period of time, and we've got them back several years, but we don't have to even keep those by law. We keep them according to a retention schedule, and then we get rid of them.
We did start 4 weeks ago, live streaming to YouTube. And once it's on YouTube, they can't take it off.
It'll be there forever.
But that is not the official record of the meeting. The adopted minutes are the official record of the meeting, which is why
So
it's
there could be
important.
something on that recording that someone says it's not any official record.
Sure, absolutely.
And they say, well, I didn't say that, it's not an official record.
Well, if they do, and somebody can prove, it doesn't matter what they said. It really doesn't matter what they said. What matters is the action that the board took.
Right.
And that's what's important.
So someone could come forward and say, I have a recording.
And the recording will probably reflect the action that they took, which was, should be recorded in the written minutes.
Go ahead.
Can I go back to communicating with council really
Sure.
briefly? So at the board meeting I had a couple weeks ago, the board felt really handcuffed in the ability to reach out to council as individual members expressing an opinion to council I think they had the impression they couldn't do that, or that the board couldn't express an opinion on a topic they weren't asked to comment on, because it wasn't within the duties outlined in the charter.
What board are you on?
Airport Advisory Board. It just got a little contentious, and I couldn't, we're trying to understand where that line is between private citizen and board member.
The
Where
private
those come
citizen,
across.
you can always come to
Correct.
your council member, but you need to indicate that I am not speaking as an airport board member. I am speaking as a private citizen.
So what right as a board member do you have to comment?
In what form? I mean, you can always talk to council members. You can't represent a position of the board unless the board has acted by majority vote. I mean, I think board members talk to council members all the time in official and private capacities.
But I could say, I'm a member of this board and this is my opinion, even though the board may not agree. That's acceptable to express that to a council.
That'd be fine.
Okay.
And, you know, I've seen reports with minority opinions expressed in them, if it's that important. And it actually ties a little bit to the issue I remembered. So there is the Fair Campaign Practices Act, which is a statewide law that prohibits the expenditure of public resources on ballot questions. So Longmont City Council set ballot questions for the issuance of debt for 3 types of facilities. There were fire station replacements, city facilities, and recreation and golf courses. So as a board member, you should not be advocating for or against. That is prohibited by the Fair Campaign Practices Act. You are certainly free to express whatever opinion you want on your own time as a private citizen, not as an official of the city of Longmont. I remember Tim Waters, Councilmember Waters, is on the golf board, very passionate about golf. Some of these questions relate to golf, and he asked me about, you know, where that line is. So always free as a private citizen to express opinions. Don't make it in your official capacity as a board member.
I think that's the information we have to share, but we're more than happy to answer any questions. Even if you have specific ones about something or serving on the board that we didn't cover.
And thank you very much for coming out on a Monday night. This is, I think, my biggest group ever. I mean, this is much longer. So it's great to see.
You do have a little evaluation form there. Can you just take a minute and just share your thoughts with us? It helps us know what is helpful and what is not.
I'm an influencer comment right now. Let's go outside and have a meeting. Don't tell anyone. We found.
Please take a cookie if there's any left. I don't want to take them back.
Something. We're just gonna go slam.
You can just leave your evaluation sheets at the end table down there to leave it. It's great.
We just have a team, okay? You can't, they're all these things. I can't. The code helps me have a mindset, I'm like,
If you're ready, you're ready.
Generally,